Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel, and in this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Kiev because we have lots of very important and interesting pictures and interesting updates. So for example, this is the first picture I would like to discuss with you, and this post was made by the second person in Ukraine, by Andrei Yermak. He is the second person after Zelensky, and in this photo that was published on his social network, we can see Zelensky above Red Square, and as you can see, the Red Square is covered with fire. So he is trying to tell us that this attack on the 9th of May is inevitable and that Ukrainians are planning to do this. Obviously, this is a very strong message to the Russian Federation and its allies and to the leaders that are going to visit Moscow the 9th of May. Furthermore, we have another important update that today a phone conversation between Kellogg and Yermak, this person who published this photo, is scheduled to take place today. So on the 4th of May of 2025. During the conversation, they will discuss the victory parade on May 9 in Moscow. Kellogg will convey the US position that they do not recommend that Ukraine launch strikes on Moscow and its surroundings or use drones or on the roads of parade guests. So this is very important message. We see that the United States of America are trying to stop the Ukrainians of doing this, but it's very difficult to say whether the Ukrainians are going to accept the recommendations of the United States of America or not. And telling the truth, we believe that something is going to happen, obviously. Furthermore, the Russians today attacked the city of Kiev, and they not just attacked the city of Kiev, but they attacked a lot of territories, but the biggest damage the Russians dealt to the city of Kiev. Lots of explosions, lots of strikes, and maybe this is something like a message that the Russians are trying to send to Ukraine, saying that if you do anything during the 9th of May, most likely we are going to do much bigger damage to you on the 11th or 10th of May, or even on the 9th of May as well. So the Russians send the message. Now we need to understand whether the Ukrainians heard this message or not. At the same time, it's very important that for the first time for the previous 3 days, the Ukrainians didn't attack the southern regions. The Ukrainians didn't attack the Crimean Peninsula, and the Ukrainians didn't attack further deep inside of the southern regions of the Russian Federation. I'll remind you that during the previous 3 days, the Ukrainians used around 400 drones and missiles altogether to attack the southern regions. According to geolocation, one aircraft of the Russian forces was destroyed, and Zelensky, for example, today stated the Ukrainians managed to bring down another one. So we see that today the Ukrainians didn't attack this area. Maybe they have changed their mind. Maybe the United States of America managed to force the Ukrainians to change their plans regarding the 9th of May and regarding the first decade of May. At the same time, we got report that the Russians carried out massive missile strike all over the entire Odessa. We don't have geolocations or proofs that can show us damage that the Russians managed to do, just this picture. But maybe the absence of Ukrainian attacks during the night between the 3rd and 4th of May is connected with this situation. Maybe the Russians during the previous night managed to destroy Ukrainian positions, Ukrainian launching positions or warehouses with drones, and now the Ukrainians basically have no possibilities to carry out any attack. At the same time, we got very important statement from the northern part of Russia. According to information we have, 3 drones were brought down over the Murmansk region. So Russians reported that yesterday 3 drones were brought down by their air defense in the most northern part of the Russian Federation, and it is very interesting how exactly the Ukrainians managed to get here. Some sources reported, and the Russians reported, for example, that the last attack of this type took place somewhere in September of 2024, and when talking about those attempts to attack, I'll remind you that several pro-Russian resources reported that those attacks were carried out from the territory of Estonia and Finland. So now it's also very interesting how exactly the Ukrainians managed to get this part, how exactly the Ukrainians managed to break through the Russian layered defense or something like this. Now let's discuss the parade that is going to take place on the 9th of May. If you remember, yesterday we got lots of interesting articles regarding health of leaders of Europe, and today we got additional information about the situation. For example, the Serbian president has been discharged from the hospital, the country's finance minister said. Very interesting explaining why the finance minister is responsible for this announcement. According to Sini Smiley, doctors have recommended rest for Alexander Vucic. He added that if his condition improves, the president, as promised, will come to Moscow on May 9th. So, as I understand, he's not going to come, but as for now, he's just trying to gain additional media victory or something like this. Also, we got report from the Slovak Prime Minister Fico. He is still preparing for a trip to Moscow on May 9th. This is how Robert Fico's party commented on the information about his illness. As for now, we know just one situation, just one leader refused to go to Moscow, and we're talking about the Indian delegation, but they're saying that they canceled their trip to the Russian Federation due to the situation on the border with Pakistan. So probably they have a reason not to go. Now let's move to the situation on the ground. We have lots of very important changes, and first let's talk about the South Donetsk direction. According to information we have, the Russians during the previous 24-48 hours managed to improve their position significantly in the vicinity of the settlement of Novoselka, more precisely between the village of Novoselka and Volne Pole. So the Russian offensive operation started somewhere on the 1st of May of 2025, and this is the situation by the end of the 2nd of May of 2025. By the end of the 3rd of May, according to information we have, and according to several geolocations, the Russians managed to improve their positions along this tree line and to dig between settlement of Vilna Pole and the settlement of Novoselka. By the beginning of the 1st of April, we see that the Russians also managed to improve their positions between the area of Russian breakthrough and the settlement of Novoselka. And we see that from this perspective, and according to several pro-Russian resources that reported that the Russians managed to advance even further in the western direction, we see that currently the main Russian target is the settlements of Zelene Pole and the settlement of Novopol. So this is the primary target of the Russians. We have video from Zelene Pole. In this video we can see how the Russians were bombing and basically reducing this settlement to ruins with FABs, with artillery strikes. We see that some of these attacks remind us something like artillery preparation. So due to these activities, due to this Russian breakthrough and Russian aviation activities, we expect that during the next 72 hours the Russians will try to attack these two settlements from the south, from the southeast, and from the east. So most likely the Russians first of all decided to improve their positions along 0510 road between the settlement of Velika Novoselka and Timirovka. So this is the primary target for the Russians, and they will try to establish complete control over this territory. Probably they will not be able to do this by the 9th of May, but obviously during the first half of May. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the settlement of Bogatyr. There are very heavy clashes here, but the Russians still haven't managed to improve their position significantly. We still can see videos with Ukrainian soldiers in the more northern and the more northwestern part of the settlements where the Ukrainians are changing their positions from 1 hour to another with the purpose to reduce risks of being attacked by the Russian drones or Russian aviation. At the same time, the Russians, according to geolocations we have, managed to establish complete control, fire control, probably FPV drone control over one of the most important evacuation roads that goes between the settlement of Bogatyr and the settlement of Alexeyevka. In this video we can see how the Russians destroyed something on the most northeastern part of the settlement. Probably the Russians destroyed some deployment point, temporary deployment point that Ukrainians used for logistic purposes. So these buildings and these constructions were destroyed, and once again, as you can see, these are the most northeastern parts of Bogatyr and buildings that lays on the road between Bogatyr itself and further in the northern directions to the settlement of Alexeyevka. So the Russians understand that they are getting closer and closer, despite the fact that this progress is very slow. The Russians are getting closer and closer, and sooner or later it is going to be very important to establish complete control over the main evacuation roads and to establish operational encirclement for the Ukrainians. Now let's discuss about the Novopavlovka or the Dnipro direction. As you can see, during the previous 12 hours, we received additional changes, lots of very important changes. Let's first of all compare the map. This is the situation by the end of the 3rd of May of 2025, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 4th of May of 2025. As you can see, the Russians managed to improve their positions, and due to this number of updates, we see that the Russians began their full-scale scale offensive operation, and most likely the Russians are tasked to answer the Dnipro region before the 9th of May. As for now, the Russians managed to answer the settlement of Kotlarovka. This is the final settlement on the Russian way towards the border. This is the video, and based on this video, most of the mappers adjusted their maps. In this video, we can see how Russians were moving in the direction of the settlement by the name of Kotlarovka. As you can see, in this moment, the Russians crossed some barrier, some defense barrier of the armored forces of Ukraine. Behind these two Russian soldiers, we can see two more Russian soldiers that were running right after them, and then we can see two more. So just in this video, we can see at least 6 Russian soldiers that answered the most eastern part of the settlement of Kotlarovka. No, up to 10 soldiers. Yeah, 10 soldiers managed to cross this distance without any vehicle, without any motorcycle, just on their own. And as a result of this, let's say, operation, the Russians answered the eastern part of the settlement. So based on this video, most of the mappers adjusted their maps, pro-Russian mappers adjusted their maps, neutral mappers. So the battle for the settlement of Kotlarovka has begun. And most likely the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back in the very near future, because it is very difficult to hold positions in this area, because the distance, for example, between the nearest settlement and the Kotlarovka itself is around 4 kilometers that Ukrainians need to probably cross using their own feet, as the Russians did, and obviously it's impossible in the age of FPV drones. So most likely the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back, and they will lose control over this territory. If the Russians establish complete control, then the Russians will have no barriers and no problems to move further in the western direction with the purpose to establish flags somewhere here. This is the media victory we're talking about. The Russians, they don't need to take under control any of the settlements on the territory of Dnipro. They just need to establish their flags somewhere here. And most likely this is what the Russians are planning to do. At the same time, we see that the Russians are trying to improve their positions in the direction of Novosergeyevka. If you remember, yesterday we discussed that according to several pro-Russian resources, the armed forces of the Russian Federation answered the eastern part of the settlement, but as for now without any proofs. As for the beginning of the 4th of May, several mappers, including neutral mappers, adjusted the settlement of Novoalexandrievka completely under Russian control. Maybe today the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm this information. Furthermore, according to neutral mappers, the Russians began advancing from the settlement of Nadiivka along the tree lines, also in the direction of the same settlement. So the Russians are tasked, obviously, to get the border between Dnipro and the Donetsk regions. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Konstantinovka direction, where the Russians also continue their offensive operation. Today, according to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions along N32 road, and the Russians managed to approach the stronghold that is located in the central part between these reservoirs. I'll remind you that there is a very big and very powerful stronghold of the armored forces of Ukraine in this area, and this is exactly this strategical stronghold where the Ukrainians will try to slow down the Russians for as long as possible. But I'll remind you that Ukrainians currently have very poor positions, because the Russians during the previous days managed to outflank the Ukrainians and to answer the settlement of Novoalenivka. So basically, now the Russians are attacking this settlement, this stronghold, from the south and from the northeast, which is obviously impossible. Makes this, let's say, control over this stronghold impossible for the armed forces of Ukraine. As for the pocket itself, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything, just several videos how the Russians were bombing and attacking the settlement of Zarya, which is located in the central part of this pocket. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Konstantinovka direction itself, between the cities of Toretsk and Konstantinovka. Today, pro-Ukrainian sources published one video, this one. We will not watch this video because there are lots of casualties, lots of violence, lots of attacks of Ukrainian drones on Russian soldiers, but pro-Ukrainian sources reported that most likely all episodes from this video are taking place exactly on the territory of the settlement of Nilipovka. We added this icon softly, but today we got another more or less proof that the Russians controlled the village and that the Ukrainians haven't managed to force them to fall back. As for the Chasiv Yar direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special. Now let's talk about the Kupiansk direction. During the previous 24 hours and during the previous night, the Russians managed to improve their positions. First of all, we got video, yesterday we got video that confirms Russian control over the northern part of the settlement of Tarskoye. So in this video, we can see how Ukrainians were bombing and attacking Russian positions on the farms in the northern part of the settlement. And as for at the beginning of the 4th of April, several sources confirmed this information. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions between the settlement of Katerinovka and Makeyevka. This video was also published by the Ukrainian side, and in this video we can see how the Russians were attacking Ukrainian positions, how the Russians were storming Ukrainian positions, and how Ukrainians were attacking the Russians with FPV drones. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map and we have colored these fields in Russian favor. So we see that the Russians are maintaining the lines, and obviously now they try to shorten the distances between the settlements of Makeyevka and Novomikhailivka with the purpose to get as close as possible to the settlement of Grekovka. So we see that the Russians probably now have some plans to maintain this buffer zone, to maintain their lines and to establish control over these territories before beginning of offensive operation in the direction of Liman. So just to have a very big gap, very huge secure zone before moving further in the southern direction. As for the city of Kupiansk, we have a lot of updates. The Russians continue destroying basically the northern parts of the city, the area where the Ukrainians have their main concentration of forces. I'll remind you that currently the Russians are trying to improve their positions in the vicinity of the settlements of Dvorechna, Zapadna, with the purpose to move further in the western direction, and the Ukrainians always counterattack exactly from this part of the settlement. That is why the Russians have a lot of reconnaissance job to do. As soon as they discover another temporary deployment point, the Russians destroyed this point immediately with FAB. The Russians, according to information we have, managed to improve their positions to the northwest of Zapadne. So the Russians are trying to move in the northern direction with the purpose to attack the settlement of Kutkovka from the south and from the east. As for now, there are very heavy clashes for huge forest between the settlements of Kutkovka and the settlement of Dvorechna. So now the Russians are trying to move in this direction with the purpose to shorten the lines and maintain their positions and to get as close as possible to this village, because most likely Kutkovka is the next target of the armored force of the Russian Federation during the battle for the Oskol bridgehead. As for the Sumy direction, as for now we haven't received anything, but the most important updates are coming from the settlement of Tetkina. Several reliable pro-Russian resources reported that they managed to discover the concentration of Ukrainian forces around the settlement of Tetkina. The sources reported that Ukrainians could use this situation before the 9th of May with the purpose to attack the settlement and to cut the salient during the 9th of May. So just to get another media victory and to take completely valuable settlement under complete control. So we are talking about the settlement of Tetkina. So this might happen during the May holidays and during the next several days. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.